Seems like you all are expecting me to say something, so I'll oblige. Welcome, everybody, to the very first Humanities Forum of 2024. I have that here in my notes. It says thunderous applause. Okay, good. The Humanities Forum takes place most Fridays during the semester, although this semester we've got a couple on a Tuesday and on a Wednesday, I think, just to keep you on your toes. But typically Friday in this room at this time. And each one of them is an opportunity for us, for the Providence College campus, to gather together and hear from scholars and journalists who come from around the world to share their research, to expose us to new perspectives, new ideas, and for us as a community to deepen our appreciation for the humanities. Whether this is your first forum or you're a grizzled veteran of these affairs, I want to briefly tell you what you can expect over the next 75 minutes or so. First and foremost, we'll hear from our guest speaker, and at the conclusion of his talk, there will be some time for questions and answers. And it is an inviolable forum rule that the first question has to be asked by a student. So, all you students out there, put your thinking caps on. Professors aren't going to bail you out in this one. The Q&A will wrap up probably around 4:45 or 4:50. After which we strongly encourage you to head down the hall and start your weekend off right with some hors d'oeuvres in the great room where you can talk to your fellow participants about what you heard and what you thought about it. The last thing I should say is I'd urge you to close down those laptops, silence those phones so that you can pay full attention to what's happening in the room. If you have to write up a reflection paper, you can reflect afterwards. It'll be all right. Okay. With that, I want to say that today we have the rare treat of hearing from a leading scholar who also happens to be an alumnus of Providence College. And class that, there you go. Thunderous applause. With that, I'm pleased to turn the mic over to Dr. Marina Outlaw, who will be introducing our guest.
Thank you, Dr. Bernhoft, and thank you everybody for coming out on a rainy, gross Friday afternoon to hear from our speaker. It is my great honor to introduce to you Dr. Austin Sarat. Dr. Sarat is the William Nelson Cromwell Professor, I had to look at my notes to make sure I said that right, of Jurisprudence and Political Science at Amherst College. He earned his PhD from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and a JD from Yale University. Even more important, as Dr. Bernhoft let us know, he is a 1969 graduate and a 2008 honorary degree recipient from Providence College. Homegrown. He has authored, co-authored, and/or edited more than 100 books in his distinguished career as a scholar and advocate for the study of law and the liberal arts. His awards and accomplishments are too numerous to list, so I will not take up our entire afternoon doing so. I did notice that his most recent award in 2022 was the Jeffrey B. Ferguson Memorial Teaching Prize, awarded to an Amherst College faculty member for distinguished teaching and contributions to the curriculum and intellectual life of the college. Dr. Sarat is what we would call in academic circles a triple threat: teacher, scholar, colleague. If that is not enough, Dr. Sarat, I knew I was going to do it, is considered one of academia's preeminent thinkers and writers on capital punishment. I am thrilled to have him here because I am teaching a seminar on capital punishment this semester, and I'm thrilled that my students get to hear firsthand from an author of 2 of their many books for this semester. So we are thrilled to have him here today to present his talk, America's Death Penalty, Does Anyone Deserve to be Put to Death? Please join me in welcoming Dr. Sarat. Sarat.
Thank you. When I came to Providence College in the fall of 1965, I came with the ambition of becoming a lawyer and going into politics. And I wanted to be president of the United States. In my sophomore year, I took a course from a political science professor named Richard Alsfeld The course was called The Legislative Process. Does that sound like a sexy title or what? Legislative Process. And in that class, magic happened for me. I was a diligent student. Some would have called me ungenerously, but accurately, a nerd. I used to beat everybody else to the library when it opened and spent many a joyous, I actually mean painful, evening reading Aquinas or Aristotle. Don't nod when I say painful and Aquinas because you won't graduate. But my life was changed in that class. So I want to tell you, but for Richard Altfeld, this afternoon's speaker would have been President Austin Sarat. What do you think? Let's try that again. President Austin, what do you think? Way to go. So I owe a lot to Providence College. Education I received here was, to say nothing of, first-rate and transformative. And I have great affection for the place, and I consider all of you lucky to be here. But I need to ask you a favor, and here's the favor I need to ask you. I want you to be willing to talk with me this afternoon, not just to listen to me. You got that? You follow that? I came a long way, all the way from Massachusetts, took my life in my hands on the Mass Turnpike, and I am not here just to hear the sound of my voice. So, you can talk with me or ignore me. And if you ignore me, I will remind you of what my mother used to say every time I disappointed her. She would say, "That's fine. What difference does my happiness make anyway?" So if you don't speak to me, it'll be a traumatic remembrance of what my mother used to say. So let's start the conversation with a simple proposition. How many of you believe that it is okay to punish the innocent? Okay, I guess we're done. Let's go to the reception. Why don't you believe it's okay to punish the innocent? Help me. That's not helpful, right? They didn't do anything wrong. So why is it not okay to punish people who haven't done anything wrong? What is the phrase?
They don't deserve it.
They don't deserve it. So we're going to spend a fair amount of time talking about this idea of deservedness. So what does it mean to say that someone deserves something? Good. That was totally good.
It's kind of like a reward for someone who put a lot of time and effort into an action and either completed their goal or did a good job.
Good. So deservedness may have something to do in your mind with merit. I work hard on my paper and I get a good grade and I deserve it. Good. Do you want to help more on deservedness? Good. Or a reward, either consequence or reward based on your behavior. Good. Nicely done. I completely love the phrase based on your behavior. Generally, when we talk about deservedness, we link deservedness to things like choice and free will. We make choices. We choose to study or we choose not to study. We choose to follow the law or we choose to violate the law. So generally, when we think about deservedness is an important moral category, but I'm going to try to argue with you that it is a very vexed moral category. It's often hard to figure out what people deserve and to translate deservedness into punishment. Are you good with that? It's often hard to figure out what people deserve and then to translate deservedness into punishment. At the heart of debates about capital punishment in the United States today, I'm going to try to argue that at the heart of debates about capital punishment in the United States today are concerns about deservedness and whether anybody, quote, deserves to die. Now, if you're a post-structuralist, deconstructive, socialist supporter of Bernie Sanders, I thought that line would be funnier than it landed. You might think, actually, no one deserves anything, and everybody deserves everything. Whoa, that was good. No one deserves anything, and everybody deserves everything. But that's not the world in which we live. In the world in which we live, the category of deservedness, following, as you said, from choice, we choose. I loved what you said. We produce a consequence on the basis of our choice. And then we expect to get either rewards or punishments. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about deservedness and how it plays out in the debate about capital punishment in the United States. So I'm going to tell you what the argument is, and then you can drift off and think about other things. Here's what the argument is. We are in the middle of a national reconsideration of capital punishment in the United States that would have been inconceivable 30 or 40 years ago. Inconceivable 30 or 40 years ago. Today, we are on the road to abolition in the United States. This national reconsideration of capital punishment that would have been inconceivable 30 or 40 years ago has largely, I will be arguing, been driven by the increasing doubts that Americans have about whether or not the death penalty system in the United States does a good enough job in dealing with deservedness. So again, I'll make that concrete for you. None of you believe in punishing the innocent. Why? Because they don't deserve punishment. Well, one of the things that you're going to see that we're going to talk about is in the United States today, the death penalty system does a very bad job in making determinations of innocence or guilt. Since 1976, and that date will come back in a few minutes, since 1976, about 190 people have been freed from death row because they were falsely convicted. 190 people. Roughly, that means for every 8 people we have executed in that period, 1 has been freed from death row. How's that for an average, huh? For every 8 or 9 people that we executed, we freed 1 from death row. More on deservedness. How many of you believe that people should be punished because of their race? Why not? Come on, say it. Good, nicely done. They've done nothing to warrant a punishment based on the color of their skin. Good, that was good. She congratulated you, that was good. Well, here's what we know about the death penalty system in the United States. The best single predictor of whether or not someone who is convicted of a capital crime will be sentenced to death, because you can be convicted of a capital crime and not be sentenced to death, is the race of their victim. Whoa, that was a surprise. Not the race of the offender. The race of their victim. We're going to talk about more in a minute. Last night, the state of Alabama executed Kenneth Smith. And for the first time in the United States, the state of Alabama used a technology called nitrogen hypoxia. Why did the state of Alabama use nitrogen hypoxia as its method of execution? 3 states in the United States have adopted nitrogen hypoxia. Alabama is the first to use it. Why? Because the method of execution most often used in the United States, what is that method of execution that's most often used in the United States? Lethal injection. The method of execution, by the way, come on, help me. No, you got to wait for the question before you answer it. That was good, though. So can you name all the methods of execution that are legal in the United States? What a pleasant way to spend a Friday afternoon, huh? name all the methods of execution that are legal in the United States today. And if I wanted to be mean to you, I would say name them in alphabetical order, but I won't.
I don't know.
Lethal injection.
The other one, nitrogen hypoxia.
Now nitrogen hypoxia, good.
I don't know if it's still true, but doesn't one of the states have like death by firing squad?
Firing squad. Are you having a Utah tingle?
I think that's about the extent.
Come on, help. More. Other methods of execution, legal in the United States. Other methods of, yeah. The electric chair, classic, one of our classic methods of execution, yeah. The gas chamber. Any others? Any others? I love this. This is what I call audiovisual teaching. Hanging? Yes. The method of execution which is most frequently botched in the United States is lethal injection. What are we talking about? We're talking about deservedness. Americans now worry that the system of capital punishment doesn't do a very good job of assessing deservedness and translating deservedness into judgments about punishment. Innocent people are convicted. People are given a death sentence in part because of the race of their victim. And then when we get around to executing them, we often botch an execution. Roughly 8%, 8 out of every 100 lethal injections have been botched in the United States. Kenneth Smith was killed last night in Alabama during the second execution attempt by the state of Alabama. The first, in November of 2022, was horribly botched. So, we're in a period of national reconsideration of capital punishment, unimaginable from a perspective of 30, 40 years ago. Why is that? Because people worry that the death penalty system is a broken machine. A broken machine. So imagine the following. I might ask someone, are you in favor of the death penalty in the abstract? And they might say that they are. And then I say to them, but would you be in favor of punishing or executing an innocent? And that person is likely to say no. And I might say to them, are you in favor of the death penalty in the abstract? And they might say yes, and I might say, are you in favor of executing people because of their race or the race of their victim? And they're likely to say no. And I might say to them, are you in favor of the death penalty in the abstract? And they might say yes. And then I might say to them, are you in favor of executing people in a cruel and gruesome way? And they might say no. And that conversation about innocence, race, and botched executions is where the death penalty system fails to deliver on the promise of giving people what they deserve. And that's why we are in a period of national reconsideration of capital punishment. Okay, so let's think a little bit about the arguments about the death penalty in the United States. Justice Brennan served on the United States Supreme Court, distinguished career on the United States Supreme Court, said the following in a case which, if you haven't read, you should read, called Furman versus Georgia, decided in 1972, more than a half century ago. Brennan said, death is a unique punishment. The calculated killing of a human being by the state is a denial of the execution person's humanity. That person loses the right to have rights. That argument I'm going to call the old abolitionism. The old abolitionism. The old abolitionism, arguments against the death penalty, was philosophical and moral. Notice, denial of the person's humanity. That has nothing to do with the death penalty machinery. You got that? You follow that? It has nothing to do with what we just talked about conviction of the innocents or sentencing on the basis of race or botched executions. But things have changed. One of the Supreme Court's most ardent enthusiasts for the death penalty, Justice Scalia, said this in 1984. Abolitionists often describe with poignancy the death of a convicted murderer by lethal injection. Murderers regularly come before us like the murder of a man ripped by a bullet suddenly and unexpectedly with no opportunity to prepare himself in his affairs. And then look at the last part. How enviable a quiet death by lethal injection. And by the way, that's often an argument that's made by people who support the death penalty. That in comparison with the crimes, the death penalty is enviable. Notice, in Justice Scalia's rendering of the enviable quality of lethal injection, no reference to the fact that lethal injections are frequently botched. So here are the usual pro-death penalty arguments. Number one, the death penalty deters. And by the way, if you were in my class right now, but you're not, I would ask you the following, what I would call utilitarian question. I would ask you the following question. I'm not going to ask you, but if I were going to ask you, this is what I would ask. Would you believe in capital punishment if I could convince you that for every person who was executed, 8 innocent lives would be saved? Are you having utilitarianism tingle? So that's the deterrence argument. We take this life and we save the lives of others. Second, some people believe in retribution. By the way, I think you all believe in retribution. Are you all retributivists? Yeah, look at that. He's smiling when he said I'm a retributivist. Why do you identify yourself as a retributivist, kind sir? Good, nicely done, brilliantly done. Is there a difference between revenge and retribution? That's what a good question, Austin. Good, good, good. The law in the United States pretends that they're different. The law in the United States pretends that retribution is different from vengeance. Vengeance is emotional. Retribution is calculated. Vengeance can be disproportionate. Retribution is supposed to be proportionate. Here's why I think that we're all retributions. None of your colleagues raised their hands because they were afraid I might pick on them. We're all retributionists because we believe in the following idea. People should get what they deserve. And that's the heart of the retributivist or retributionist calculus. People should get what they deserve. Some crimes are so horrible that people should die. The logic of deterrence. For punishment to deter, the following must be true. Criminal must be a rational utility maximizer. Does drinking occur on the Providence College campus? If you lie to me, you will go to hell and I will be there. So you don't want to do this. Is there drinking on the Providence College campus? No. I'll see you in hell. So if you've ever been to a party at Providence College at which large amounts of alcohol have been consumed, then you understand how the criminal as a rational utility maximizer may not work. Because often we are not in our best ways when we behave. We're angry, or we're drunk, or we're not thinking. You got it? You follow this? For deterrence to work, the criminal, the potential criminal, must be calculating. They must know what the punishment would be for the crime. Because if they don't know what the punishment, good. Where's home? Massachusetts is a big place. We're in Massachusetts. Linfield, Mass. Can you tell me what the punishment for residential burglary is in Linfield, Mass? Are you having a deterrence problem? So here at you're a Providence College student? So among the intellectual elite in the country, and he doesn't know the criminal code of Linfield, Massachusetts. You must have a rich and full life. In addition to knowing what the punishment is, the potential criminal must believe that they will be arrested, convicted, and given a death sentence. You got this? You follow this? So here I am contemplating whether I'm going to commit a crime, and I've got to go through all of this. What is the punishment for that in Linfield, Mass? And how efficient are the police in Linfield, Mass? And how aggressive are the prosecutors in Linfield, Mass? And thank God you live in Massachusetts because there's no death penalty. And finally, in a capital crime, for the logic of deterrence to work, a person must believe they will be executed if they are sentenced. This is what we know about deterrence. Arguably, for each inmate put to death, 5 murders are prevented. Now, that's not an analysis based on talking to any murderers. That's just a statistical aggregate. Here are the problems with the deterrence argument that suggest that that number is just a statistic. First, killers do not generally coolly evaluate their chances of being caught. I've got something else for you to read. Will you read if I recommend this? Look at that. I love that. You're not going to blink. It's an article by David Luckenbill, a sociologist, called Crime as a Situated Transaction. It reminds us that you are much more likely to be the victim of a crime if you're in a social setting than you are if you're walking down the street. Especially a social setting where there is alcohol, because people's inhibitions drop. Too few murderers get sentenced to death. Remember, I'm now trying to calculate, here I am I likely to get a death sentence? Roughly 2% of all murderers get death sentences. Now I might think I'm in the 98%, right? Do any of you drive on I-95 through downtown Providence? 2% aren't going to make it. But I don't think that. I think I'm going to be in the 98% that's going to make it through that godforsaken interchange in downtown Providence. Criminals are concerned about whether they'll be caught, not whether it will happen to them afterwards. If any of you have children, remember this. This is a good life, no extra charge for the life lesson. People are more concerned about whether they'll get caught than what happens afterwards. And the certainty of apprehension, it's not the severity of the punishment that matters in deterrence. So here's some more things for you to look at. Murder rates in states with and without the death penalty. Non-death penalty states, the one in red, have lower murder rates than death penalty states. That may or may not have anything to do with the death penalty. It may have to do with the demographics of the population of those states. Murder rates by states with and without the death penalty. States without the death penalty have more murders than states with the death penalty. This is a problem for the deterrence argument. You got that? You follow that? This is a problem for the deterrence argument. Does the death penalty act as a deterrent to crime? This is a public opinion study. Notice what's happened to the belief in deterrence over time. This data was from 1985 to 2006. Belief in deterrence is going down. Okay, the just desserts argument. This is where I started with. Do you believe in punishing the innocent? Or do you believe in the logic of deterrence? What does it mean to do justice and punishment? It means to give people what they deserve. Now, there are other conceptions of justice. There's distributive justice and compensatory justice. But in the world of punishment, to treat people justly is to give them what they deserve. May I just say the following? Job. You all know from Job? You all know from Job? You don't know from Job? You got to talk to me or I'm going to start remembering my mother. Do you know from the Job story? So Job was afflicted by God in a kind of, game with the accuser, sometimes called Satan. Not because Job had done anything wrong, but because God wanted to see whether Job was a righteous person or just righteous because he had been rewarded. For deservedness to work, we have to understand that deservedness is backward looking. It's always about what you have done. I deserve an A, professor, because I worked hard on my paper. Deservedness is premised upon the belief that people determine their own fates by what they do. You get what you deserve on the basis of what you do. The principles of desert and punishment. Only the guilty should be punished. Deservedness is also committed to the principle of equal treatment. People who commit the same... You going to help me with this? Come on, you can help me. It's okay. I promise I make a better second impression. Let's see, what crime can we assign to you? Oh, she loves this role. Good, that's totally good. She robs a bank and steals... I'm a professor. I only have like 3 seconds of attention, and then I have to speak. She robs a bank. She steals $10,000. She knows you well. You rob a bank. You steal $10,000. She gets nothing. She gets probation. She gets to take calculus. And you go to jail for 10 years. What would you say about that? Not fair, right? Principle of deservedness is that people who commit the same crimes should get the same punishment. So, associated with deservedness is some idea of equality. And here's where we're really going to have a problem, right? Punishment should be proportional to the crime. Punishment should be proportional to the crime. Okay, will you help me? I walked all the way over here. I did, because you have the brightest smile in the room, so stop smiling and I would not have come to you. So, tell me what would be a proportional punishment. You remember our friend from Linfield? Come on, Linfield, wave. What would be a proportional punishment? Let's say our friend from Linfield committed a residential burglary at night. What punishment should our friend from Linfield get? Do you know him, by the way? Okay, good. So this is entirely impartial judgment. Couple years in jail. What do you think? Couple years in jail for residential burglary at night? Obviously, he's a Bernie Sanders supporter. Few years in prison. I love that. That's totally good. A couple. Okay, good. I commit attempted murder. What punishment should I get? Good, good. Are you having good? Good. That is totally good. That was the right answer, by the way. It's very hard to reason from crime to punishment. It's very hard. There is no right punishment for residential burglary at night. There is no right punishment for attempted murder. Horizontal proportionality, going from crime to punishment, is very difficult to do. But I would assume that we would believe that whatever the punishment is for residential burglary at night, the punishment for attempted murder should be greater. Would you agree with that? Good thing, because otherwise you would have blown the next 45 minutes. So, horizontal proportionality is really hard to figure out. Vertical proportionality, reasoning from whatever the punishment is for this crime, comparing them, that's more doable. But the logic of deservedness depends upon the ability to reason from crime to punishment. Whoops. Right. I love this. Both when and how we punish, in theory, are governed by retributivist commitments. Right? We shouldn't punish people who haven't done bad things, and we should punish people more severely when they do worse things. Immanuel Kant. Punishment must be kept free from all mistreatment that would make the humanity of the suffering loathsome. You following this? Even Kant, who was a retributivist, you remember Justice Brennan? Believed that we should never punish in a way that is cruel. That brings us to the Eighth Amendment. Do you all have favorite constitutional amendments? You have a favorite constitutional amendment? That's your favorite too? Oh, I have an Eighth Amendment buddy. That is completely fabulous. Why is the Eighth Amendment your favorite constitutional amendment? Good. So I should praise him, but I'm going to say he really hasn't gotten to the heart of the Eighth Amendment. Here's why the Eighth Amendment is so important in the United States. It is the only provision of the Constitution of the United States that protects the guilty. The Fourth Amendment, protection against unreasonable searches and seizures, protects people before they've been convicted. The Fifth Amendment, guarantee against compulsory self-incrimination, protects people before they've been convicted. The Sixth Amendment, right to trial by jury, right to counsel, protects people before they've been convicted. Come on, tell me, you love it, right? The Eighth Amendment protects people after they have been convicted. Good, that is totally brilliant. Are you having an Immanuel Kant tingle? Let's go back. You follow? Here's why. Here's why. When we punish, it tells the world as much about who we are and who we want to be as it does about what the criminal has done. You got it? You follow this? Who we are and who we want to be. Because simply, this is going to be good, simply because someone deserves something doesn't mean we have to give it to them. And that space between deservedness and punishment is where we come in. You got it? You follow? There is no right punishment for residential burglary at night. There is no right punishment for attempted murder. I better back off. There is no right punishment even for murder. So here's the central dilemma of desert. Figuring out what people deserve is essential to the justness of punishment, yet figuring out what people deserve is extremely difficult. Are you having a them tingle? Yeah, because they were just muttering, like, what is the right punishment for residential? It's a year, it's 2 years. Good. Translating what is deserved into punishment is hard. Residential burglary, assault with a deadly weapon, arson. I don't know what the right punishments are. Here's my argument about the death penalty. You remember what I started with? Americans are losing faith in the death penalty in the United States because Americans are losing confidence in the ability of death penalty states to reliably determine who deserves to die and losing faith in our capacity to execute humanely. Why do we want to execute humanely? Come on. Why do we want to execute humanely? Nicely done. That is totally, don't touch me. That is totally fabulous. So, right. Have you ever seen the movie Dead Man Walking? Have you seen Dead Man Walking? Good, I'm going to come to you. It's okay, really, I promise. Whatever you say, I'm just going to say fabulous, so you'll be good. So, can you remind us what the plot is of Dead Man Walking? Come on, talk, because the... Good. You saw the movie? You saw the movie? Good. Good. That is totally, again, yeah, that is totally good. 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 It's okay. Breathing is good. Yes. Good. Ganug. Stop. The movie, good. No. I love that. I'm so glad I'm at Providence College. You laugh. I respect that enormously. That's the world in which I live. Trying to think about how do we respond to horrible crimes? And that movie portrays it for us. Horrible crime. An innocent boy and a girl were killed and assaulted. And then what do we have to figure out? I'll do it. We have to figure out what do they deserve? What do the killers deserve? Brilliant. Completely fabulous. Are you getting extra credit for coming?
My teacher's right there, though. You can ask him.
So could you do me a favor and give her extra credit? Oh, may I just say that he's tough. That is really good. And by the way, he's also committed to principles of fairness. So I tried for you, but didn't succeed. In 1972, remember 1972? Remember what happened in 1972? Furman versus Georgia. 1972, the United States Supreme Court struck down the death penalty as then applied and said, for the death penalty to be legitimate in the United States, it has to be based on individual consideration of the background and character of the accused. Remember our little conversation? She commits a bank robbery. Remember how much she took? Way to go. You took $10,000. And then I said, would it be fair if she got a different punishment? And you said no. Notice what I left out of that hypothetical. I left out anything about the criminal. I just gave you information about the crime. So what the United States Supreme Court said in 1972 is we're going to have a death sentence. It can't just be about the crime. It has to be about the criminal as well. How hard is it to figure out what people deserve when we reason from crime to punishment? How much harder is it when we take into account who they are, what kind of lives that they've led? Since 1973, I think I said 76 when I started, 193 people have been exonerated from death row in 30 different states. By the way, come on, help me. What state do you think has had the highest rate of exoneration? Come on, this is easy. I'll give you a hint. It begins with F and ends with Florida. I hope that's right, by the way. I made a big fuss. So of every 9 people have been executed, 1 have been released from death row. Let's see if I can get this thing to do its thing. So, there you go. From 2000 to 2023, there are an average of more than 4 exonerations a year. Now, some of you may think, what's a little convicting the guilty? Not such a big deal. It's simply the cost of doing the business of the death penalty. You got that? You follow that? You got it? You follow? Any of you drive cars? You drive a car? What kind of car do you drive? Ooh. I drive a pathetic little Subaru. I'm going to stay out of your way. We know that 20,000 people a year will be killed in automobile accidents. We don't know who they are, but we know that roughly 20,000 people a year will be killed in automobile accidents. I trust that most of you would think we shouldn't get rid of automobiles because there's death associated with them. So for some people, death penalty enthusiasts, 4.2 exonerations a year is merely the cost of doing business. Oh, I got it right. I was hoping for a little round of applause, but that was okay. That was about as little a round of applause as I could have imagined. You delivered. 30 exonerated in Florida. How often do you think a person who's been executed was in fact innocent? 59% of the American public answered that question yes. Remember what I started with? Americans are losing faith in the capacity of the death penalty system to do the business of delivering undeservedness. People of color have been accounted for 43% of the people sentenced to death since 1976. And 55% of those currently awaiting execution are people of color. 75% of the cases in which people get a death sentence, come on, you got to help me. Okay, I believe in the Fifth Amendment too. You got to help me? Good, that's totally good. I like him better. 75% of the cases in which someone gets a death sentence involve the murder of a white victim. Race of the victim is a more important predictor than race of the defendant. Do you have a theory why? Come on, what you don't know, just make up. You're a PC student. Sure, 75% of the case in which someone gets a death sentence, their victim was white. Why is it that race of the victim plays such an important role in death sentencing? Good, totally good. Good, nicely done. Whose internal bias? Nicely done, brilliantly done. So there's an interesting article that you ought to read by a man named Stephen Carter called When Victims Happen to Be White. By the way, I want to give you a good college habit. When a faculty member or guest speaker recommends something for you to read, pretend to be writing it down. It makes them feel good. And that's what Carter said is what you said, which is this suggests that there's some greater value to white life than there are to the lives of people of color, at least in the minds of judges and juries. Let's a quick tour through methods of execution. I think we did this already, right? Hanging, electrocution. Fire. By the way, if this was my class, I would ask us now to do an exercise in which we choose the method of execution as if it was going to be applied to us. But I won't, because it's not my class. Come on, clicker. The gas chamber. Lethal injection. I didn't include nitrogen hypoxia, so this is not as fresh as yesterday's news. Whoop. There it is, the electric chair. I believe the electric chair is the most potent symbol of the death penalty in the United States. I think when people think the death penalty, they have this in mind, but again, I'm just making that up. The invention of the electric chair came out of a competition between Thomas Edison and George Westinghouse. Edison didn't want his kind of electricity used in the electric chair because he thought it would be bad for business. Turn on your light, you might get electrocuted. So Edison wanted the electric chair to be called not electrocution. He wanted people put in the electric chair to be called people who were Westinghoused. Isn't that great? That is completely fab. I mean, you're talking about any of you doing marketing? That's called reverse marketing. I won't show you this, but Edison, to show like the horrors of electrocution, actually electrocuted an elephant. And if you go online, if any of you are so disposed, you can go online and see the film of this elephant being electrocuted. Last public execution in the United States, execution by hanging, Kentucky in 1935. And again, I hope some of you will ask me afterwards whether or not you think, or I think, that execution should be public. They're not anymore. Lethal injection, again, very familiar, person on a gurney. The failure of just desserts. So this is our botched execution rate. Of all methods used between 1900 and 2010, 3% were botched. And the botch rate at that time for lethal injection was the greatest. It was 7%. It's higher now. It's over 8%. The death penalty today. Where are we now and where are we going? Nations with and without the death penalty. Notice, Europe, Australia, Canada, no death penalty. The United States, China, Saudi Arabia, nations with the death penalty. Countries with the highest number of people executed in 2022, China we really don't know. We think it's in the thousands. Here's the map. States with and without the death penalty. 27 states in the United States retain the death penalty as a punishment today. Many of those states that retain the death penalty on the books have not executed anyone in more than a decade. Many states that retain the death penalty have not executed anyone in more than a decade. So if you take the states that have abolished the death penalty and the states that don't use it, that is a real substantial majority of the American states. Oh, there we go. So we know executions by region. By the way, be careful where you commit your murders. Do it in Rhode Island. I don't think I was supposed to say that. Don't do it in the South. Remember what I said? The only safe speech is no speech at all. I just violated my own, but I'm leaving right after this anyway. I'm going to cross the state line. I'll be safe. States with the largest number of executions since 1976. 1976, remember 72, the Supreme Court struck down the death penalty. 76, they brought it back. That's why 76 is the baseline. Texas, not surprising. Oklahoma, Virginia, Florida, Missouri. Death sentence, shall I sing to you? I got no enthusiasm for that. Music, would you like some music? I'm just singing to the two of you. Something's happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear. That was music, by the way, in case you didn't recognize it. Death sentences have declined. We're in a period of national reconsideration of capital punishment. Look at that. In the late 1990s, we were death sentencing 300 people a year across the country. 2022, it's a couple of dozen. What has driven down death sentencing? Well, I told you about all this worry about retributivism. Here's another thing that's driven down death sentencing: the availability of life in prison without parole. The availability of life in prison without parole. Without life in prison without parole, I don't think these death sentences would have gone down in the same way. Why? Because what are juries worried about? If you were on a jury and you had to decide between a death sentence and some other sentence, assuming that the person was guilty, what might you be worried about? That's totally good. You should major in engineering. So you might be worried about money, but another thing you might be worried about is if I don't give them the death sentence, they might get out and do it again. Life in prison without parole offers the assurance that they won't get out. More states have abolished the death penalty in the United States since 2007 than in any other 17-year period. What's my theme? We're in the midst of a national reconsideration of capital punishment, driven largely by doubts about whether the death penalty system can deliver on the promise of deservedness. Executions. Again, at the high point of executions in the United States in the 1990s, 98 people a year were being killed. Last year it was lower than 20. Right? Again, these are states that have the death penalty but haven't used it. The brown states, see the states in brown? Like Montana, Nevada, Wyoming, Kansas, Kentucky, they haven't executed anyone in more than 10 years. So there's the death penalty on the books, they just don't use it. Public support for capital punishment. In 1996, Gallup measured it at 80%. In 2020, I haven't found anything more recent, 55% were in favor of the death penalty. Ask people about the morality and fairness of the death penalty. People who oppose the death penalty, or people who believe there's some great risk of putting an innocent person to death, are much more likely to oppose the death penalty. Governor George Ryan, he was the governor of Illinois. Not to say anything bad about Illinois. Like many Illinois governors, he ended up in prison after his term. In 2003, he said, our capital punishment system is haunted by the demon of error. Error in determining guilt, error in determining who among the guilty, notice the word, deserve to die. Harry Blackmun, United States Supreme Court Justice, said the death penalty remains fraught with arbitrariness, discrimination, caprice, and mistake. Experience has taught us that the goal of eliminating arbitrariness and discrimination can never be achieved without compromising an equally essential component, individualized sentencing. You remember Lafayette? Have you seen or listened to the music from Hamilton? Lafayette, French, Revolution, that guy. So this is where I want to end. The death penalty in the United States is in trouble because the death penalty has not been able to deliver on the promise of giving people what they deserve. And Lafayette said 200 years ago or more, I shall ask for the abolition of the punishment of death until I have the infallibility of human judgment demonstrated to me. Human judgment. And until the infallibility of human judgment can be demonstrated, Lafayette said, no one should be put to death because mistakes in capital punishment are irreversible. Okay, that's fine. Little applause and now questions. Oh, I've got a thing I could use. I forgot. Let's see if I can do this. Sorry, I was just having a little fun. Okay, questions?
Oh, this mic is on. Okay. Yeah, so do what our friend from Linfield up here is doing and raise your hand and then make sure the mic gets to you so that we can capture your words.
Totally fabulous.
Thank you for the talk.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah. So I was just curious if you think, like this conversation we've been having for the last hour or so, do you think capital punishment is any way related to the debate on abortion in America?
Oh, such a good question.
Because I think in a way, they're linked.
Why don't you answer the question?
I
love this.
There's my cursory viewing of that map of the United States.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting that
Yeah.
the states that, like we're talking about deservedness.
Good.
States in the South that permit the death penalty,
Yes.
those seem like the states that would be opposed to abortion.
Yes. And what do you conclude from that?
I don't know. That I think it's interesting that maybe they like states in the South. I don't know. They seem to approve of state-sanctioned death.
Good.
People are deserved of it.
Nicely
They're not.
done. Oh my God, I can die a happy man. Right, because that's the thing. So people think it's inconsistent to be, against abortion because you want to protect the life of the fetus, but to be in favor of the death penalty. And if you believe, as the church does, in the sanctity of life and in a culture of life, you might embrace those positions. But the way you answered your question is the way that many people answer the question. The fetus is innocent. The person who's committed a capital crime is not. So it looks like an inconsistency may be reconciled. And by the way, again, if you listen to the debates about reproductive rights in the United States, you often hear it described as the sacrifice of innocent life. But if you're a death penalty supporter and you believe that the death penalty can deliver on our promise of deservedness, then you think that's a different thing. And should we complicate our question a little bit more?
Yes, I think so.
You're my ideal student. So if we were to complicate our question a little bit more, we would throw in another thing, and that is war. So is it inconsistent to be against reproductive rights, but in favor of the use of violence in just wars? What a good question.
I don't know.
I know. Now it's fourth down and long, and you're going to punt. That was pretty good. So, yeah. So the question that we need to think about is when, where, and under what conditions is the sacrifice of human life acceptable in a culture devoted to its protection? I teach a course at Amherst called Murder. I tell my students it's not a vocational course. They don't think it's funny either, but I think it's hilarious. And among the things that we consider in the course called murder are things like the doctrine of self-defense. So if I'm an advocate of the culture of life, and you attack me, and the only way I can defend myself is to take your life, is that inconsistent with my commitment to the culture of life? Or does my commitment to the culture of life require that I sacrifice my own life? Are you having a difficult problem, Tingle?
Yeah,
It's like a little bit of a paradox. Totally good. Okay, other questions? By the way, hold on one sec. I want you to cultivate this skill. You ready for the skill I want you to cultivate? The skill that you have to cultivate is you have to cultivate the skill of asking questions. Not in lectures, but if you want jobs. Because what people are looking for when they hire someone is not only someone who's good at doing the job that they're hiring for, but that's someone that's going to be curious to think about ways of doing it better. Write that down in your notebook. Good. Asking questions is a good way to get yourself ready to go into the job market. Okay, sir. Sorry.
Yeah, thanks for the talk. I'm trying to figure out what your position is, because you seem to have started with whether anyone deserves to die, which of course is a question of justice. But in the end, it seemed you simply came to the idea that the reason our system is wrong, bad, is because it might kill someone who does not deserve.
Good, nicely done.
So I suspect that your position, if that's an actual argument, and that is the argument that you're leaning on, which it has been today, you don't see a problem of the state-sanctioned killing of a guilty person.
Good, nicely done. That's a very helpful question. But at the center of the question is a confusion of the difference between a normative claim and an empirical claim. Just let me finish. I did not make the claim that the reason we should get rid of the death penalty is because of all these flaws. What I said is the United States is in the period of national reconsideration of capital punishment. That's an empirical claim. That's a claim about what is happening here. That was why the song I sang. The question about whether we should have a death penalty is not resolved by public opinion polls. So I don't want it to be confused what I was doing. What I was doing was making an argument about what is happening in the United States that is driving the death penalty to the point where we can say we are on the road to abolition. Now, if you wanted to ask me a question like this, it might say, do you think anyone deserves to die? That's not a question about an inconsistency in the argument. That's a question about a normative position. And here's the answer to the question, which is why I asked the question about dead man walking. I do think that people deserve to die. I just don't think the state should ever kill them. So when I saw the film Dead Man Walking, I walked out thinking Matthew Poncelet deserved to die. Timothy McVeigh blew up a building in Oklahoma. Do I think he deserves to die? Worse than that. Now, you're old enough to remember Michael Dukakis. In the second presidential debate in 1988, Michael Dukakis was asked this question. The first question he was asked by Bernard Shaw, who was then the lead anchor at CNN. Shaw said to him, Governor Dukakis, would you be in favor of the death penalty for someone who murdered your wife, Kitty? And Michael Dukakis gave what I would describe as an entirely bloodless and inadequate answer. He said, no, Bernie, and then he talked for 15 minutes about the drug problem. Here's the way Mario Cuomo would have answered that question. You're old enough to remember Mario. And it's my position. What Mario Cuomo would have said is, of course, I would want to kill that person with my bare hands. But that's not what our government should do. And that's why I asked at the beginning. Even if we can figure out what people deserve in a moral way, that still doesn't resolve the question of how we punish them. So that's my normative position. The rest of it is just describing why we were on the road to abolition. Yes, sir.
Hello. I know I said I was against the death penalty during your presentation,
But you've changed your mind.
No. I wanted to offer a little devil's advocate, and
Oh, don't. I'm too old for devil's advocate.
that might tie into the comments of Dr. Keating.
Yeah.
My first question is, could you go back to that slide about the pro-death penalty arguments?
Sure, if I could. Here we go. So which slide would you like?
I think it was the second slide. It was very early on.
Okay.
It was the pro-death penalty arguments, and it had the two different ones.
Okay. Let's see. Come on, help me here. How do I get this thing to do its thing?
While you're doing that, I can basically...
Let's go to slide. Yeah.
Yeah. The two different was deterrence
Deterrents and just desserts.
and just desserts. I'm thinking that there might be, in a very limited circumstance, maybe a third type of scenario.
Good.
Let's say that the International Criminal Court brings a terrorist.
Yeah.
A terrorist has killed, let's say, 1,000 people
Yes.
in an attack.
Yes.
If that person's convicted by a jury,
Yeah.
there's always the concern that if you put them in life imprisonment, they have these very big infrastructures, and that there's always the possibility that they could get out and kill not 5 people,
Yeah.
the example that was given, but 1,000 people,
Yeah.
2,000 people.
Yeah.
Is there any way in which that could be excusable
Good.
to involve the state, or in this case, an international justice system?
Good. But where you started and where you ended, I don't think are in the same place. So I'm going to go back to where you started because I think you're right. You're absolutely right. A third argument you can make in behalf of the death penalty is what I would call permanent incapacitation. So that's why I was asking your colleagues, like, if you're on a jury, what might you worry about? You might worry about the person's going to get out. So as long as they are alive, you think, oh, they might get out and murder other people, so we better execute them. So that's totally good. You can add a third, what I would call permanent incapacitation. But it's still going to drive you back to the just desert principle. In other words, you have to be committed to some idea that this person has done something to deserve this punishment before you get to, we're just going to execute them to incapacitate them. And that's why I also pointed out how important life in prison without parole has been. Because life in prison without parole offers, I don't know whether you would say it's the illusion, but offers the promise that this person, when you put him in jail, is not going to get out to kill again. So I take your point as saying there's maybe a third reason that people might support the death penalty, and again, I call that permanent incapacitation.
And how would you reply to that, maybe? How would you?
Good. That is totally good. Here's how I would reply to it. If you believe in democracy, as I do, then you might believe the following. At the center of a commitment to democracy is the idea that decisions are reversible. So here's something for you to think about. Think about the difference between the Constitution of the United States and the 10 Commandments. In the Constitution of the United States, there is Article 5. You all remember Article 5 to the Constitution? Remember, your PC students, what you don't know, you just make up. Article 5 of the Constitution allows for amendment. There's no provision for amendment that I know of in the 10 Commandments.
No.
What does that mean? That means democratic governance depends upon a commitment to allowing reversal. Death penalty doesn't do that. So if you're committed to democracy, I think you also want to be opposed to the death penalty because death sentences are final and irreversible.
Okay.
We got time for a couple more questions. I see 3 hands. Let's see how much we can do.
Thank you for the talk.
Thank you for coming. Are you here voluntarily?
I am.
She's one of the 2. I asked before you all arrived, how many would be here voluntarily? And I was promised that at least 2 of you would be. So thank you for coming.
Of course. What is the rationale for the death penalty? Because in my
Good.
opinion, I think life in prison left to your own devices and your own thoughts is
Yeah.
far more torturous than
Good.
being snuffed out of existence.
Good.
Hence why I believe the southern states have a higher proclivity for doing the death penalty.
Yeah.
Because I assume in their logic, they're sending them straight to hell faster. I assume that's what it is.
Well, again, where you begin and where you end strike me as slightly different. But I like them both. So this is an argument that complicates the deservedness argument. So if you believe you can calculate what people deserve, and then you want to make someone suffer, you have to figure out where they're going to suffer more, life imprisonment or the death penalty. Especially with uses of technologies like lethal injection, which is a very unreliable technology, many people think they're not suffering enough, that the suffering is an inadequate response to the crime. Are you good? Are you following this? When George Ryan, the governor of Illinois, who I pointed out, George Ryan freed everybody from his state's death row. When he did that, he basically said, they will suffer more in prison. The death penalty is too good for them. So, if your commitment is to maximum suffering, you follow me? If your commitment is to maximizing suffering, then a lot more horrible. Good, totally fabulous. I have something else for you to read. It's an essay by Jean-Jacques Rousseau on the Lisbon earthquake. Lisbon earthquake killed 60,000 people. And there was a tsunami and fires. It was horrible. It was one of the great disasters, the great sudden disasters of its time. And Rousseau said, we shouldn't mourn them because, for all we know, the sufferings in their future would have been even greater than these. Is that fabulous or what? So if you're into business of calculating, I want people to suffer a lot, then you might choose life imprisonment without parole. That's what George Ryan said he was doing. Or you might say, let's not use lethal injection or nitrogen hypoxia. Let's do something that'll make them suffer. You're having an Immanuel Kant tingle in the Eighth Amendment? That's why the Eighth Amendment is so interesting to me. Because the Eighth Amendment says, no matter what you do, we will not treat you cruelly. You follow that? One of the great tests of our characters as human beings is how do we respond to gross evils done to us. And the Eighth Amendment says, I will never treat people cruelly, even if in some abstract moral sense they deserve it. Is that a fabulous amendment or what? Way to go.
I just had a question earlier. You briefly mentioned something about public executions, and I was just wondering if you could go into more detail
Thank you.
about your thoughts.
Thank you for remembering. No. So if we're going to have a death penalty, do you think our execution should be public? Good. Thinking is good. Good.
I think in some ways, if your family member was
Good.
a victim of a crime,
Good.
it would give you some kind of solace in seeing that person killed, but I also think that that could be further traumatizing for the family.
Good. Good. Nicely done. Fantastic, right? So if you think that what we ought to be doing with the death penalty is responding to the unimaginable grief of the survivors of the victim, then you might want to calculate, would they want to see this done in public? But I'll give you another argument about whether executions should be in public, because they are public. The state executes in our name. The state executes in the name of the people of that state. It's not a private gesture. It's a public gesture. Why were executions taken out of the public square in 1935? They were taken out of the public square because they were thought to offend middle-class sensibilities. It's kind of not what we do. It's not what decent people do. So now they're kind of semi-public. They're behind prison walls, but they're witnessed. They're witnessed. They're journalists. They're family members of the victim and of the condemned who are there present. But here's something you think about. If it is too shameful to be done in public, it's too shameful to be done at all. Now I'm sounding like my mom. Are you having a mom tingle? Because Mom used to say, the test of your character is whether you would do what you are doing in front of everybody. And if you wouldn't, don't do it. Thank you, Mom.
Last question.
So we've talked a lot today about modern trends in crime and punishment.
Yeah.
But we've focused a lot on the U.S.
Yeah.
In Europe, in a lot of Scandinavian countries, and I'm sure you get this question a lot from college students about Scandinavia because we just love Scandinavia. But a lot of those countries have shifted their prison systems to focus more on rehabilitation and reintegration into society. Even in some cases with people convicted of murder,
Absolutely.
they are cognitively sound enough to undergo that rehabilitation and reintroduction. Do you think that in the U.S. or anywhere that rehabilitation and reintroduction works better as a deterrent to crime than punishment? And if so, why?
So, rehabilitation is not about deterrence. It's about, if by deterrence you mean what I'm talking about, which is called general deterrence. In fact, it's the opposite of general deterrence. You commit a crime, I'm going to make your life better. But your question is a really interesting one to me because you could say that what rehabilitation does is what is called specific deterrence, meaning you're not going to commit the crime again. And this goes back to what I said about democracy. Think about what we do when we punish anybody. We think we're giving them what they deserve. We hope. We hope they're giving them adequate suffering, though we may not give them adequate suffering. We hope we're doing justice. But here's what we know. What someone deserves, if we could calculate that, at one point in time, may not be what they deserve 20 or 30 years later. You follow that? You are a much more dangerous person than I am. We know that. Why? Because we know that the propensity to violence is linked to two things. This is good life advice. Maleness and youngness. Young men are much more likely to commit violent crimes than people who look like that. Are you with me? So, the Scandinavian thing about reintegration and rehabilitation, reintroduction may have a lot to do with a lot of things. But I think what it is committed to is the idea that we should never give up hope in the capacity of human beings to change. To give up hope is to pretend to have the judgment of God. We don't have that judgment. Oh my God, my rabbi would be so proud of what I just said.
Let's give one last thunderous round of applause.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you for the invitation. What a pleasure it is to be back at my school.
We'll see you all down the hall getting some treats.